Morocco Israel collaboration cooperation series that we are
We
doing
are
in
doing in
partnership
part
with
with
you,
you,
Shama
Shama
Mistali.
Mistali.
Thank you so much. Yes, thank you for having me again. And I'm excited for today's talk, one of our mutual shared topics. And yeah, we were having some trouble with technical issues, but we are here now, and we're really excited to get this started. So welcome everyone on our fifth deep dive and sixth event in our Morocco Israel cooperation series, exploring the potential and possibilities for collaboration and synergy across different fields, sectors, and industries. Today, we're talking about an area of really great potential and one of Dan's favorite topics, which is cooperation in academia and geopolitics. And with us today will be a range of educators and dedicated professionals who have actively been working in creating partnerships between Jews and Muslims and between Israel and Morocco in academia.
That's right.
That's right.
Oh, we're going to have to play with this microphone settings throughout this event. I'll remind all of our listeners that we here in Sharaka, we are an organization founded by peace activists and social leaders and entrepreneurs from the Gulf, from Israel, and from Morocco, and really from around the region. We're working to shape a new and positive Middle East. The Abraham Accords have given us this opportunity, this unique, truly unique and historic opportunity, with the support of many governments, whether overtly, the governments who signed the accords, or even kind of behind the scenes, tacitly. We have a lot of support to promote a new region, a positive region based on cooperation that really benefits all of the peoples in the region. We are, I remind everyone, a nonprofit, non-politically affiliated, non-governmental organization, and we are working in partnership with a lot of groups and a lot of people around the region and really around the world, all designed to foster more regional cooperation, to deepen the mutual understanding, increase the mutual trust and investment in all of the countries of the Abraham Accords. And specifically in this series, we're working on the new relationship between Israel and Morocco. So our first
speaker tonight.
Our first speaker tonight. Oh, Shalma, you're going to have to, yeah. We would like to invite from the Atlantic Council, Karmiel Arbit. Karmiel Arbit is a non-resident senior fellow for Middle East programs at the Atlantic Council. Her research focuses on U.S.-Israel relations, the peace process, Israeli and Palestinian politics, Congress, broader issues affecting the Middle East. A co-founder of Keybridge Strategies, she has consulted for various nonprofit organizations around the world, advancing public diplomacy, government relations, and community engagement strategies, excuse me, really from the United States throughout the Middle East into Latin America and all the way into South and East Asia, and has been recognized as a top foreign policy influencer by Diplomatic Courier, is a Truman National Security Fellow, and I will take this opportunity to put out a teaser that the Atlantic Council and Sharaka are working out the details of a super exciting new collaboration. So do stay tuned to both our respective social media accounts for some big news on that soon. Karmiel, welcome.
Thank you so much. I am so delighted to be here with you, Dan and Shama. Just incredibly excited about the work that each of you are doing, and also Dan about the possibility of a Sharaka Atlantic Council collaboration. So very excited I hope we'll have a chance to come back and talk about what that's going to look like in the future. Knowing that the discussion today was focused really on how think tanks across the region, but specifically between Israel and Morocco, can leverage the Abraham Accords to build stronger ties and deeper substance, really made for a perfect opportunity for me to come on and talk a little bit about the Atlantic Council generally and our work in this space. So for those in the audience who are not familiar, the Atlantic Council has been around for about 60 years, dedicated to promoting constructive internationalism around the world. We are the largest national security think tank in Washington. And we have 10 centers covering different issues around international security and global economic prosperity. And while some of this may seem obvious at a time where isolationism is really sweeping through the United States, our work to promote ties around the world has become, in many ways, more important and in other ways more challenging than ever. And it's in that context that the Atlantic Council also has a Middle East program that works with allies in Europe and around the wider Middle East to protect U.S. interests, to build peace and security, and to unlock what we call the human potential of the region. And within that, the Atlantic Council has a growing body of work specifically focused on Israel and normalization. We believe that normalization has fundamentally changed the dynamic of the region and created an unprecedented opportunity for greater peace and stability. And so really before the Abraham Accords were struck, we had done extensive research on what opportunities might exist should some of the peace agreements or should some of the relations that had already existed between countries in the region come to the surface and formalize. If normalization were to come to fruition, what could that look like? And frankly, how could different countries benefit? And so our work has been heavily focused on exactly that, the benefits. How do we ensure that there is a trickle-down prosperity and benefits to individuals in every country that has forged peace with Israel? One of the things that we have seen is just how easily peace agreements can go cold and how fragile they are. So while Israel had had an agreement with the Moroccans in the 90s, it fell apart during the Second Intifada. And what we saw is a fragility and really a failure to leverage that agreement at the time. And we've similarly seen peace between Israel and Egypt and peace between Israel and Jordan remain very cold. And so a think tank has an interesting role in that we are able to target and influence two different audiences. One is to push governments to promote policies that both encourage government-to-government interaction, whether it's on core issues like security, or broader issues, which we are very focused on at the Atlantic Council, or second, to look at the people-to-people component to these relationships. And as a think tank, we're looking to persuade both audiences. So we have a joint trilateral agreement between INSS in Israel and the Emirates Policy Center in the UAE, where we forged a trilateral working groups, 5 of them, that looked at target issues where think tanks could come together to address key challenges around the region. And that included everything from how to advance the situation for Palestinians, how to cope with Iran's behavior in the region, the Eastern Med, how to advance people-to-people ties. And now we're increasingly looking around the world to see how the region can cooperate in responding to or engaging China. And so what we see are just huge amounts of potential. That cooperative agreement is something that we're now growing to include a Bahraini think tank, Darasat, and looking to Morocco to find partners. One of the things that we're seeing is strong government-to-government relationships that are already forming. The Moroccans and the Israelis have more than a dozen agreements. The Emiratis have struck more than 25. But what we're not seeing is the full maximizing of the potential at the people-to-people level. And so we're trying to find ways to really push and advance that type of engagement through these intellectual dialogues, through leveraging different organizations that are already functioning within each of these countries to look at challenges that they are facing, not just through the prism of their individual country or the bilateral relationship, but to also think about the multilateral component. So a second key thing in our work is pushing for multilateral cooperation among all normalized countries, so that Morocco, for example, is not only benefiting from its relationship with Israel, it's also benefiting from a closer relationship with the United States and this administration, as well as stronger relations with other countries that have normalized with Israel, including the UAE, Bahrain, Egypt, Jordan, and using that framework to find other areas to engage. So we bring together both senior ministerial level gatherings at what we call the N7, the 7 normalized countries, but also expert level groups, identifying the key areas where each country can most benefit as a result of these agreements. So looking at issues like climate change, agriculture, economic development. We're also very interested in education policy, how to leverage the Abraham Accords to promote tolerance across the region, and also trade. I think it's very interesting to look at not only the trade opportunities that exist between Morocco and Israel, or Morocco, Israel, and the United States, but also trade opportunities that could become available to Morocco in a multilateral context, should there be a multilateral free trade agreement among the normalized countries. So these are all areas that we're focused on as a think tank, and that we believe can ultimately be transformative in ensuring that normalization isn't just at the top level, but has a trickle-down effect through academia to the people. I think I'll pause there. I'm not sure if we have time to do some questions and answers, or if, Dan, you have some specific questions you want me to touch on in the context of the work that we're doing. But we see this really as a model for engagement. We're looking to bring larger groups of Moroccans into the discussions that we're having. They're already part of the multilateral work that we're doing. We're exploring private sessions. I think there's a benefit to bringing intellectuals together behind closed doors to think through some of the most challenging issues, and to also do so publicly. I'd mentioned to Shama, the Atlantic Council right now is actively recruiting non-resident senior fellows in Morocco who are committed to this work, who can help elevate it publicly, both in Morocco, but also to a Western audience. One of the things that we're doing at the Atlantic Council is ensuring that the Abraham Accords is not beholden to politics, that it is not owned by one administration, but rather working hand in glove with the State Department, who has been incredibly supportive of our work on these programs. And so what we're looking for is to really expand those voices and stakeholders to bring more individuals to the table who can help build out these agreements.
Thank you so much for that. And you alluded to the incredible and important work that you guys are doing, oftentimes behind the scenes, to look at things from a kind of top-down perspective, working with key stakeholders in all the different countries, making sure this stays above politics. And one of the main messages that we do when we take speaking delegations around the world, or when we talk to also different audiences, is that the Abraham Accords are one of the most positive developments in recent Middle East history. And so it must stay above politics, and it's not always easy in today's super polarized world. And with groups like yourself really doing this fantastic work of identifying the key areas of cooperation, this is just a further allusion to the kind of collaboration that we are working on with us on the ground. And we will certainly be glad to have a follow-up deep dive when we are ready to announce that together with you. But we assure all those listening that it is going to be exciting and very impactful for all the peoples of the region.
Thank you so much, Carmiel. Unfortunately, we do have a really tight schedule today, but before we leave you, I want to make sure that our viewers have a way to contact you. So if you can just share with us an email, because you've shared some incredible insights into the region and context into why this is a really historic and important moment for a lot of people and for the region. So if you can let people know, and including people who might want to apply for the non-resident scholar program that you are opening up in Morocco, how do they reach you?
Absolutely. So you can email me. Everybody get out a pen at carbit at atlanticcouncil.org. Maybe we can drop that email in the chat as well. I think, as I said, the two of you and the work that you're doing to elevate this issue, to bring it to such a broad and diverse audience is so exciting and so critical. And I would love to connect with the people who are participating in this discussion. Morocco and Israel both have maturing and sophisticated think tanks. I think there is an incredible opportunity for collaboration within that space. And because the US has such a developed civil society and engagement on this work, in a trilateral partnership, we have the ability to accomplish so much. And I hope that we can continue to engage on these issues. And I look forward to staying in touch with both of you and with your audience.
Thank you so much. Who do we have next?
So next, I want to introduce to you a dear friend and really an incredible human being, Faiz Ghassus. Faiz was the first Moroccan Muslim student to go study in Israel at the age of 18 in 1997, following the Oslo Accords. This adventure is documented in his book, Faiz, Le Jeu de la Paix, or My Version of Peace, published by Ram Editions in 2008, and it has a foreword from Shimon Peres himself. And Faiz has 17 years of experience working in Israeli startups, in technical account management, marketing, technical sales management, project and product management. He recently co-founded something called Tamar Invest in 2021 with the mission to promote, encourage, and enhance partnership, economic and cultural cooperation between Moroccans, Israelis, and Palestinians by promoting Morocco as a regional economic hub of Africa. Faiz, are you with us?
I'm seeing that he may have dropped off the call.
Oh my goodness. Let's try to get him back.
In the meantime,
do you want to, Dan, tell our audience about the next discussion we're hosting next week on Thursday?
Yeah.
Do you mind
muting
yourself?
Thank you. We've been having these echo issues that we're still trying to deal with. In the meantime, next Thursday, we will be concluding the session with a discussion on interfaith dialogue, culture, and society. And with that, we will conclude this as we look to establishing what hopes to be a promising Sharaka presence and a range of partnerships on the ground between Israel and Morocco in the near future. More announcements on that to come. We don't want to say too much now. But do we have a Faiz?
We do not, unfortunately. So he's at a sort of very important diplomatic event, and he's really trying very hard to step out and join us, and he did step out earlier, but he's back in now, so we'll try to get him to join us in a bit. Meanwhile, Dan, could you introduce Nimrod to our audience?
Gladly. So we're glad to introduce Dr. Nimrod Goren, the president and founder of Mitvim, the Israeli Institute for Regional Foreign Policies, and a teaching fellow in Middle Eastern Studies at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He has a PhD in Middle East Studies and Political Psychology from the Hebrew University, and his dissertation was The Role of External Incentives in Promoting Peace, the Case of Israel and Turkey, and he will be reading it to us word for word tonight in its entirety. I'm just kidding. Dr. Goren was formerly the executive director of the Young Israeli Forum for Cooperation, in which, in the capacity, he was awarded the 2009 Victor J. Goldberg Prize for Peace in the Middle East. In addition, he served as a consultant in Northern Ireland on conflict resolution process and has worked at the Van Leer Institute in Jerusalem, the Jerusalem Institute for Israel Studies, and other reputable and fantastic places around the country. Welcome, Nimrod.
Thank you very much. Good to be here. And thank you for bringing this civilian component of this important relations between Israel and Morocco to the forefront. This relationship is so special because of its history, because of its being rooted in heritage, in culture, in personal exchanges, in parallel to diplomatic and security cooperation. So it's really the whole package, and it's very good to see this relationship being restored once again. I'll try in the minutes that I have to give some sort of an overview and analysis of what's happening in academic cooperation and policy cooperation between think tanks and universities. And first put it in the context that academic cooperation was not really big when you look at the history of Israel-Arab relationship. Now, even in past peace processes that we had in past peace agreements between Israel and Arab countries. When you analyze the type of cooperation that happened, cooperation between universities was not happening a lot. You do have an academic center of Israel in Cairo. You did have some cooperation with Egyptian and Jordanian scholars, but not a whole lot more than that, including in the 1990s when Israel had cooperation with countries like Morocco. The academic aspect was not really there. And now, over the last year or so, with the normalization agreements being promoted, you do see the academic aspect getting more traction than it had in the past. Yes, it's not appearing per se in the agreement, in the declaration between Morocco, Israel, and the US, but there is reference to topics on which academic cooperation could be done, whether it's water, energy, innovation, technology, agriculture, whatever. And during the last year or so, we do see Morocco and Israel develop all kinds of channels for academic cooperation. Some of them are happening multilaterally and some are happening bilaterally. On the multilateral element, both countries are part of the EU neighborhood policy. So they have access to European programs like the Erasmus Plus program, which enables higher education mobility between students, between scholars. Both countries eventually are to be part of the New Horizon Europe program, which enables research and development cooperation together with European partners. They also cooperate on Mediterranean and Middle Eastern context, whether it's the Mediterranean University in Fez, Morocco, established through the Union for the Mediterranean, or the high school near Tel Aviv with the Eastern Mediterranean angle that has students from different countries, or the Arava Institute, which hosts some Moroccan students together with Israelis and Palestinians and Jordanians talking about environment and climate. So there are all kinds of frameworks that enable Israelis and Moroccans to sit together in joint academic settings. But there's also a bilateral element that is becoming more and more prominent, especially since the summer of 2021, in which universities in Israel, in Morocco, are signing memorandums of understanding. And you see almost all big major Israeli universities doing that. They're finding partners on the Moroccan side that are signing cooperation agreements, and these agreements include student exchange, faculty exchange, workshops, conferences, joint research, accessibility to libraries and archives, all kinds of things that bring the two countries' academic community together, and not only on issues of geopolitics, international relations, or Middle Eastern studies, on issues of innovation and sustainability, and Jewish history and Jewish law, and a really wide variety of topics that is being discussed. And there are joint events being held to commemorate, for example, the one-year anniversary of the joint declaration and the re-establishment of ties, and delegations that visit have been hosted at the Israel's president's residence, showing the significance that is being attributed to such cooperation. So there's really something brewing here between universities, which you don't see to the same extent when you look at process with the Gulf states, where you see cooperation between experts, between departments, but not between universities as a whole to this extent. There is some movement against that in Morocco. There are protests, anti-normalization movements that are opposing such cooperation, but overall these things are making progress. The Israeli delegation in Morocco is pushing it very significantly, and I guess their Moroccan counterparts in Israel are doing the same. And hopefully when the two countries really upgrade their representation to the embassy level, this could eventually become more and more significant. I'll move to the think tank community, because what you see in the think tank world is a bit different than what is happening at the university level. It's kind of a mirror image, because over the last decade, there have been more and more think tanks being established, both in Israel and Morocco. These type of institutions have become more prominent in shaping policies and influencing decision-making. The University of Pennsylvania had a ranking. They said that Morocco has 29 think tanks, Israel has 78, and the two countries together have more than a third of the top 25 think tanks in the Middle East and North Africa region, 6 from Israel, 3 from Morocco. So this is a sector that is important, that we need to value and take into account how it has been working together. And think tanks from Israel and Morocco actually have some history of cooperation. You know, we had, for example, Tzipi Livni appear in the Amadeus conference back in 2009 or so. So even much before relations were reset, there was an exchange of people through all kinds of international conferences, mostly behind the scenes, mostly under international settings, not a really institution-to-institution type of cooperation. A lot of personal relationships that have been taking place. with Mitvim, went to Rabat and participated in the conference of the Euromesco network. We presented our work over there. So this cooperation, I think, has been taking place in the past. Unlike what is happening on the academic level, there hasn't been a really institution-to-institution cooperation agreement signed on the think tank level between the two countries over the last year or so. So we don't see the progress that happened on the academic level happening also on the think tank level, at least not formally. And that will be perhaps the next stage of cooperation in academia and policy, going from universities to think tanks, because think tanks have a lot of common denominator. The two countries have a lot of geopolitical issues that are of joint interest to them. And here we are going to the geopolitical side of this cooperation. Whatever regional setting you look at, Israel and Morocco share some interest, whether it's relation with Europe. And I mentioned the two countries being neighborhood of Europe, being part or influenced by the EU new Mediterranean agenda, whether it's the context of the Mediterranean, of how you combine or bring together Eastern Mediterranean and Western Mediterranean, issues of energy, of climate, of conflict resolution. The two countries have shared interests when it goes to Africa. Both Israel and Morocco want to become more involved in Africa. We saw Israel gaining their observer status in the African Union, despite some opposition, and we saw the constructive role that Morocco played in that regard. And both countries can have a shared interest in working towards Israeli-Palestinian peacemaking. Morocco already in the past is a country that is deeply committed to the two-state solution, that is willing to help mediate, and whenever there is a process moving forward between Israel and its Palestinian neighbors towards peace, I think Morocco can be one of the Arab countries that can play a major role in helping that happen. So there is a wide variety of topics for think tanks and the policy community in both countries to work together on. There are already some channels of communication taking place which should be upgraded, and we have a very strong structure of universities consolidating their cooperation, and all of this together with a strong background of civilian ties between the countries really lays the groundwork for a strong academic and geopolitical sphere of cooperation between the two countries with a lot of potential going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nimrod. And that was fantastic that you were able to give us really such a comprehensive overview. I actually wasn't aware of how much cooperation. It's very encouraging. I didn't, of course, I'm familiar with the Israeli academic and think tank scene, but I wasn't familiar with how expansive and developed it was in Morocco. So it really seems like two of the countries that have more of the developed think tank and research scene, they can lead to collaborations, possibly researcher exchange, and certainly exchange of information and joint conferences, as we do deal with a lot of similar challenges around the region, like you mentioned. So I think that was really helpful to put all of this into context. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And just because of time, we're going to have to be really, really quick and introduce our next guest, Monsieur Hassan El-Haj. He is the president of the Permanent Committee at the CESE, the Moroccan Council for Economic, Social and Environmental Affairs. He's a former dean of the Faculty of Law and Economics for 2 terms in 2005 and 2013, and former professor of economics at Mohammed V University. He's the chairman of the Commission for the Analysis of the Economic and Social Affairs, a member of the board of directors of the Forum of Euro-Mediterranean Institutes of Economic Sciences, former executive member of the Mediterranee Association, the founding president of the Economics Management Aggregation Jury from 2001 to 2008, and really interestingly, a member of the board of directors of the Royal Institute of Amazigh Culture from 2002 and 2010. And last but not least, Monsieur El-Haj is a member of the Royal Commission for the Constitutional Review of 2011, which brought many reforms forward and recognized for the first time Morocco's Jewish component as well as the pluralism that shapes Moroccan society. Monsieur El-Haj was in Israel recently and was invited to give an in-depth lecture on this Jewish component of Moroccan identity. Monsieur El-Haj, est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Oui.
Très bien, parfait. Alors, comment était votre séjour tout d'abord en Israël et quel était le retour que vous avez reçu après la conférence que vous avez donnée sur cette composante? Just to remind our viewers, Mr. El-Hajj will speak in French and I will translate.
Ok. En fait, il y a un problème. Je ne sais pas ce qui.
Est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Je vous entends. Il y a.
Un petit problème de son, oui, ça coupe un petit peu.
Oui.
Ok, on va...
Mute yourself,
Mute yourself
while
while
you're
you're
speaking,
speaking,
Shama.
Shama.
Alors, est-ce que vous m'entendez maintenant? Parce que c'était peut-être fort, oui. Oui, c'était à cause du volume. Alors, c'était la 3e fois que je venais en Israël. Je suis venu en Israël en 1994. Et puis, je suis revenu en 2009. Et puis, en novembre dernier. Alors, c'est la première fois, c'était en 1994. C'était dans le cadre d'un séminaire sur les inégalités et la pauvreté à l'université de Bar-Ilan. C'était un séminaire organisé par quelqu'un qui est devenu un grand ami à moi, Jacques Silbert, qui habite pas loin de Tel Aviv, à Ra'nana. Et en 2009, j'étais là pour donner une conférence à l'université hébraïque de Jérusalem sur les Berbères au Maroc et en Afrique du Nord de manière générale. Et la 3e fois, je suis venu dans le cadre de relations normales entre le Maroc et Israël. Et l'accueil qui nous a été réservé en Israël est incroyable. C'était quelque chose d'extraordinaire. Et on mesure à quel point les relations entre le Maroc et Israël sont tout à fait spéciales, tout à fait particulières. Donc, alors la conférence, je te l'ai envoyée, Shama, et elle a été bien reçue d'après les échos. Il y a la presse qui en a parlé. Et puis, j'ai eu des interviews avec la presse israélienne et avec la chaîne I24 News. Tout notre séjour était fantastique et on sent bien qu'il y a un amour réciproque, mutuel entre le Maroc et Israël. Voilà ce que je pouvais dire sur Alors, cette organisée à Tel Aviv, elle a été organisée par le Centre d'études et de recherche sur le droit hébraïque, qui est à Essaouira, qui dépend un peu de Beit Dakera, qui a été fondé, créé par le conseiller de Sa Majesté le Roi, André Azoulay. Mais le centre est présidé par Abdullah Ouzitan, qui est professeur à Bordeaux, à l'université de Bordeaux. Et donc, c'était lui qui organisait la conférence. Et du côté d'Israël, c'est un centre de recherche à l'université de Bar-Ilan qui s'appelle Dahan Center, qui est présidé par Shimon Wahioun. Et alors, on a eu la première rencontre, donc on s'est déplacé en Israël, une dizaine de personnes. Et il y a Al-Harrar qui est venu de Montréal, qui est le président, je pense, de l'association des Juifs séfarades au Canada. Et il va y avoir un retour, on pense au mois de mai, un retour pour une conférence au Maroc, donc où il y aura le déplacement des professeurs israéliens au Maroc, à Essaouira et à Rabat. Et le week-end prochain, il va y avoir d'ailleurs la création d'une chaire UNESCO du droit et de la culture hébraïque à Essaouira. Et il y aura justement le professeur Hiyun qui sera présent en principe et le professeur Al-Harrar qui sera également présent. Voilà pour ces activités.
Parfait, donc je vais essayer de traduire et après je vais vous demander la dernière partie sur l'UNESCO parce que je vous ai perdu un petit peu. So, for our English speaking audience, Mr. Al-Hajj was telling us a little bit about his time in Israel. And he's saying it wasn't, he was recently there for a conference, but it wasn't his first time. He had been there the first time. He was invited by Bar-Ilan University, and then the second time in 2009, he was invited by Hebrew U to give a lecture on Amazigh identity, and the third time, which was recently in the fall, to give a lecture on sort of the Moroccan Jewish component and the new context of the Moroccan Israeli normalization. And he reiterates that they were extremely well received at this conference, which highlights the special relationship between Morocco and Israel. And the conference was held in partnership. It was a conference also on Jewish law and was held in partnership with an initiative called Beit Dakira, which also serves as a museum in Essaouira, founded by the main advisor to His Majesty, André Azoulay, and was presided by a scholar and a professor from Bordeaux named Abdullah Ouzitan. 10 scholars from Morocco went to Israel for this conference, and Mr. Al-Hajj is saying that there will be a sister conference taking place in Rabat soon. Monsieur Al-Hajj, est-ce que vous avez une date pour la seconde conférence?
Alors, on avait parlé d'avril, mais le mois d'avril, c'est Ramadan, et donc ça va être reporté au mois de mai.
So the conference will be happening in May. Et puis, le dernier point sur l'UNESCO, pour que je puisse traduire.
Alors, c'est une chaire UNESCO. Hein, L'UNESCO crée des chaires qu'elle agrée dans les universités à travers le monde. Et là, ça sera une chaire sur le droit et la culture hébraïque au Maroc.
Amazing. So UNESCO is creating this UNESCO-sponsored chair in a university in Morocco that's going to focus on Jewish law and culture in Morocco. So that's really exciting. Monsieur El-Hajj, est-ce que vous pouvez nous parler du moment historique en 2011 quand vous avez travaillé sur les réformes de la Constitution? Quelle était la vision à l'époque et comment voyez-vous la normalisation et la relation entre Israël et le Maroc avancer cette vision?
Nous étions des gens de gauche en majorité dans la commission. Nous étions 19 professeurs, enfin pas tous des professeurs, mais la majorité, c'est des professeurs de droit. J'étais le seul économiste. À l'époque, j'étais doyen de la faculté de droit. Et il y avait un certain nombre d'orientations qui ont été données par le roi la veille de l'installation de la commission. Et la commission a commencé à travailler dès le 10 mars et le roi lui avait donné 3 mois pour travailler, écouter les associations, les partis politiques, les syndicats, écouter tout le monde. Et avec les orientations qui ont été données, les orientations royales. Alors évidemment, l'orientation de la commission, c'était vers les droits de l'homme, vers l'égalité entre les hommes et les femmes et vers une ouverture sur le monde. Nous voulons construire un État démocratique ouvert à toutes les cultures, ouvert aux religions, à toutes les religions. Évidemment, nous étions conscients, en majorité, pas tout le monde, que la judéité, l'hébraïsme, ça fait partie du Maroc, de l'identité du Maroc, comme d'ailleurs la mazir qui est une composante essentielle de l'identité du Maroc. Et c'était la première fois qu'on reconnaissait les différentes composantes de l'identité du Maroc et qu'on reconnaissait les affluents de cette identité. Alors évidemment, il n'était pas question de reconnaître l'identité africaine, l'identité méditerranéenne, etc., sans reconnaître l'identité juive ou hébraïque. Alors évidemment, dans la Constitution, elle est appelée la composante hébraïque, et pour ne pas mettre l'accent sur la religion, pour dire qu'on parle de l'identité culturelle et civilisationnelle du Maroc, parce que si on met juif, il faut mettre musulman, il faut mettre chrétien, etc. Et nous, on se situait sur le plan culturel, et donc nous avons choisi l'adjectif hébraïque. Et sachant qu'au Maroc, le juif, il fait partie de notre identité. Nous sommes peut-être l'un des seuls pays où il y a des tribunaux rabbiniques, où il y a maintenant, il y avait une cour suprême rabbinique au Maroc, le haut tribunal rabbinique, et aujourd'hui, il y a une chambre rabbinique auprès de la cour de cassation. Et donc, ça fait partie de la culture, ça fait partie de notre identité, et il fallait absolument Évidemment, il y a eu quelques oppositions, mais la majorité était favorable, et nous l'avons mentionné dans la constitution du Maroc. Et donc, ça fait partie maintenant officiellement de notre culture et de notre identité.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur El Haj. Donc, je vais traduire. Alors, so for our English-speaking audience, Mr. El Haj was shedding light on some of the context that enabled for those reforms to happen in 2011, and for the recognition of Jewish culture as a core component of Moroccan identity. And he was saying at the time it was a committee of leftist law professors, and he was the only one actually from academia. He was the dean of the university at the time, and they were given instructions by His Majesty 3 months ahead of the reforms, and they were very clear, direct instructions that focused on promoting human rights, women's rights, and an openness to the world and to all religions and cultures. He's saying that many of them were conscious at the time and before the Jewish identity as a part of Moroccan identity. So it was the opportunity to recognize that, and he's also saying that they couldn't have recognized African and Mediterranean components to Moroccan identity without highlighting the cultural Hebrew, Jewish part of our identity. He also notes the presence of the High Rabbinical Court and the Rabbinical Chamber within the court system, and the presence of rabbinical and Jewish law programs in universities, which is a great point to highlight, because we will hear from one of the students in this Jewish law program in Rabat, in Agdal today. So thank you so much. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur El Haj, pour votre intervention, pour votre présence et pour votre travail. Nous sommes extrêmement reconnaissants pour votre travail. Et merci pour votre temps et votre patience. Oui.
Est-ce que je peux ajouter un mot? Si on veut favoriser la coopération universitaire entre le Maroc et Israël, il faut absolument qu'une convention soit signée entre le ministère les deux ministères de l'enseignement supérieur d'Israël et du Maroc. Et c'est cette convention qui sera envoyée aux différentes universités et qui va les encourager à favoriser des conventions entre différentes universités. Parce que pour le moment, les universités publiques ne signent pas de convention, parce qu'il faut d'abord que le ministère de tutelle signe une convention avec son homologue israélienne. Et puis, évidemment, j'ai des idées sur des mécanismes de la coopération, mais c'est peut-être pas le lieu aujourd'hui ou le moment pour en parler. Je pense aux différents mécanismes qui ont été mis en place pour la coopération universitaire entre le Maroc et la France. On peut dupliquer cela pour les relations entre le Maroc et Israël. Voilà ce que je voulais ajouter. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Mr. El-Haj. So to translate that to our audience, Mr. El-Haj wanted to add a point about how to encourage further collaboration in academic spaces between universities specifically. He's saying both ministries of education in Israel and Morocco have to first sign an agreement, an MOU, because universities cannot independently sign partnerships without the ministries doing so first. And in terms of using or sort of being inspired of existing models, he was saying that we can duplicate the French-Moroccan model in this type of partnership between Israel and Morocco. Thank you so much, Mr. El-Haj. And now we're going to move to another scholar, professor, giant of Moroccan and Amazigh studies in Tel Aviv. Would you do us the favor, Dan, to introduce him?
I'd be glad to. So we are happy to welcome Professor Bruce Maddie-Weitzman, a senior fellow in foreign policy research, Institute program on the Middle East. He's an associate professor in the Department of Middle East and African History and a senior fellow at the Moshe Dayan Center for Middle East and African Studies at Tel Aviv University. Professor Maddie-Weitzman's research focuses on the contemporary Middle Eastern history, inter-Arab relations, and the modern Maghreb. He is the author of A Century of Arab Politics, The Berber Identity Movement and the Challenge to North African States, was awarded the Karl Brown Prize by the American Institute for Maghreb Studies in 2013, and also wrote The Crystallization of the Arab State System, among a number of other publications. Welcome. Bruce, are you with us? Do we have Bruce with us? No?
I think, unfortunately, there was a technical issue, so he was logged out, and he's rejoining now, so he should be with us anytime now.
Fantastic. So in the meantime, while we are waiting for Bruce to join us, and he is, of course, one of the foremost scholars of North Africa in Israel, in the Israeli academia system. So I'm curious to hear his take on the truly historic development that we have here, and what this opens up for actual researchers like himself. And I guess I would be similarly curious to hear what Moroccan researchers who study Israel and who study the Levant would think about such a development. I'm sure he's got a lot of insights to share with us. We do have a few more speakers lined up, and we will just remind so that we can be cognizant of everybody's time. We're going to try to keep it short for the viewers' sake, but we do have some fantastic speakers coming up ahead of us. Do we have Bruce with us yet? Shama, perhaps we should move on to our next speaker while we try to get Bruce on the line.
Sounds good. Unfortunately, with this platform, it doesn't allow for everybody to join us. at the same time. So we really have to micromanage a lot. Just I'm trying to give
Oh, here's Bruce.
context. Amazing. There you are, Professor
Here I
Weitzman.
am. Like a number.
Such a pleasure to have you with us. Dan, do you want to just quickly say those questions again? And I'm going to mute myself so that there's no echo.
So we already took the pleasure of introducing you, Bruce, Professor Matty Weitzman. We appreciate you joining us, and you certainly have an illustrious background as a researcher, as one of the foremost scholars in Israel of North Africa and of the Maghreb of Morocco. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on what the Abraham Accords, what the normalization and peace agreement between Israel and Morocco does. First of all, how do you view it in historic terms? And then how do you approach it as an actual researcher who's been focusing on that region for much of your career, your personal and your professional take on it?
Yeah, I'm getting greetings from people, and thank you for having me both. Thank you for the invitation, and greetings to everybody who's out there. And already, as I say, I know I've got some friends out there with us now, so it's a pleasure to be here. Where do I start? First of all, it's people always ask me, well, what's your connection? What's your connection to Morocco? And you must have Moroccan Jewish roots and all this. And I don't. And I simply came to this as it happens in academia, almost in a serendipitous fashion, as I moved to Israel in 1979 and started my academic career as a very junior researcher. I was asked to do some work to analyze developments in the Western Sahara, which I didn't know anything about. And I said that to people, and they said, "Well, go ahead, just learn. Here's some material. Go learn about it and tell us what's going on." And that's really how it started. Although thinking back about it in my younger days as a proud Jew and a proud Zionist, I was always interested in the Jewish communities worldwide. And when I started coming to Israel as a teenager, I loved the diversity of the Jewish communities that were here, and meeting more Jews from Morocco and Jews from Yemen and Jews from Iraq. And for me, this was all just very exciting. Someone whose family and family roots going back generations are from Eastern Europe. And so this was all very exciting for me. And the chance to encounter Morocco and North Africa as an academic really kind of fit in overall with my interests, my personal interests and connections that I felt towards Jewish community, and my interest in seeing Israel being, a welcome and successful country in the greater Middle Eastern and North African region. And I was interested in our neighbors and in our surroundings. And one thing led to another, and I went to Morocco for the first time in 1990 and started doing research on a whole variety of topics, and little by little, I started building up a knowledge base for myself. And you should know that, really, for a long time, North African affairs were being neglected in Israeli academia. You might find that surprising, but it was true. And because, of course, Israel was busy with its immediate neighbors, with Egypt, with Jordan, with the Palestinians, Syria. And there wasn't much being done with regard to scholarship in North Africa. And there was a sort of a place for that to develop. Unfortunately, I was able to be among the few people who were, sort of restarting scholarship on North African affairs. And it connected quite naturally for me. It connected to North, not just to history and politics, but also to societies. And when I first went to Morocco, I encountered the remnants of the Jewish community in North Africa, and that was I just seeing where my Israeli neighbors had come from was an eye opening for me. And then, of course, I encountered and eventually became devoting much of my research in the last 20 years to the Amazigh communities in Morocco and the Amazigh identity. And it was through them I discovered all the stories of the stories of common origins and cooperation and good neighborliness. Some of these are myths, some of these are realities, and it all got mixed up in terms of the contemporary Amazigh movement which seeks to fashion a new and more sort of open and pluralistic identity for the peoples of North Africa. So that's sort of how I, in a nutshell, how I got sort of became really, really interested in North Africa. And along the way, somebody asked me to do an article, actually in the Maghreb Review, on Israeli-Moroccan relations, and that was exciting for me to jump into, and that's where I discovered the deep connections between Israel and Morocco, both on the strategic political security level and also, of course, on the human level, which came from the long history of Jewish Morocco, of the Jewish communities in Morocco living in and their interactions with the surrounding societies. And so again, that was another whole area of interest to me, which I wrote about and published about. And of course, when the Oslo Accords did take place, were signed, this was brought about a breakthrough in the formal diplomatic recognition and opening up of formal diplomatic relations between Israel and Morocco. And that was very exciting as well. And to be able to go directly to get a visa from Israel from the Moroccan embassy in Israel and to enter Morocco with an Israeli passport and visa. This was, again, very exciting. And you could feel that there were people in Morocco that wanted this to happen. And of course, there were others that didn't. And the Moroccans tread very lightly in those years. Israel was always the eager country, quick, let's have great relations. Let's develop ties. Let's make it above board. Let's do all kinds of things. And the Moroccan government was, let's take it easy. We're not going to get too far ahead of our public. We're not going to get too far ahead of the region, of our allies in the East. We're still committed to the Palestinians, etc. And indeed, Morocco severed diplomatic relations in 2000 when the Second Intifada broke out. But of course, even with that severance, Israel continued to maintain its relationships with Morocco quietly. There just was no official diplomatic representation there, but there was underneath a whole lot of things going on. I was invited to a conference run by the semi-official institute. I was invited as an Israeli. Israelis were invited to that. I was attacked in some of the Moroccan press about that, and so. But really, Israel was always, we want more, and the Moroccans saying, well, we got to go slow. We're not going to move too fast on this, and which was always, of course, frustrating for the Israelis. But then you come to the recent years and really, as you know, much has happened in this region. Strategically and politically in the last 20 years. And it really was the Moroccans who dictated the pace of the reopening of the relationship in the context of the accords that Israel was signing with other countries. And of course, in the deal of the century, which was not the deal of the century that Donald Trump was trying to broker with the Palestinians and Israel, but it was the deal of the century for Morocco, in which the United States agreed to recognize the Western Sahara in return for Morocco agreeing to reopen its relationship with Israel. This was an offer that the Moroccans could not refuse. And again, in the context of kind of an exhaustion with the, being dependent on the Palestinian issue being resolved before Morocco could move forward with relationship with Israel. And so the Moroccans said, okay, we'll do it. We'll reopen what we had. And again, they tread very carefully to see what the reaction would be in their society and the reaction in the region. And they saw, I think, that this could that this wasn't dangerous for them domestically or regionally, and at that point it was. I think the Moroccans made a decision that we're going to really upgrade now. We have lots of common interests here. The Algerians are attacking us for these ties and etc. So if they want to be militant, we'll be militant right back. And we'll be strong right back. The Israelis can help us on security issues. We can, we can develop economic ties. We're going to send a clear message to our own people that it's a new era in the region. And it's not like we're abandoning the Palestinians, but we still believe in the right for a Palestinian state, but we're not going to make everything dependent on that. We have our interests, and of course, the Moroccans over the last, in the new constitution, recognize the Hebraic element as part of the Moroccan national identity that contributed to the fashioning of Morocco. So this was always again, giving Morocco a special, Morocco and the Jewish community, and by extension Israel, a special relationship, if you will. And so now they've moved to sort of put meat on the bones, if you will. And it's very exciting to see, as you probably have already mentioned, or you may know that just yesterday, the Minister of the Economy was in Morocco and signed a new agreement with the Moroccan government for a large economic cooperation package to develop trade and to develop to really extend ties. And of course, this was preceded just earlier by a major defense agreement. Really extraordinary when you think about it. How far this relationship has come in the last year. So it's very
Indeed.
It's very exciting. And we're hoping for, obviously, for more. I mean, I know that tourism is waiting for COVID to subside. And they're talking about hundreds of thousands of Israelis that will flock to Morocco. And I believe that they're correct about that. And I hope I hope they behave themselves. And I hope the Moroccans, are ready for that. But for me as an academic, as a scholar, I look forward to more opportunities to interact with our Moroccan colleagues. Tel Aviv, my university, has signed a major agreement with Moroccan Institute of Higher, the Moroccan, I guess it's the Ministry of Higher Education, to promote academic interchange. We have a large delegation, a very high senior delegation coming next month from Mohammed VI Polytech University coming to Israel and coming to Tel Aviv University, and looking forward to that meeting. I'll tell you, I think that in terms of Israeli academics coming to Morocco and speaking at Moroccan universities, I think that this is not something that is going to happen so quickly. Because I think the universities are still very wary of creating any kind of giving an excuse for demonstrators to mobilize against this student body. I know in my own case, my friends and colleagues in Moroccan academia, they were very honest about it. Well, we really can't bring you to campus because this might create a whole stir, and we don't want to do that. So we'll meet off campus and this kind of thing. So I think they're going to have to watch that and see how it develops, and see how, I mean, the Moroccans know best about how quickly they can move, and I think the Israelis are always
Thank you so much for your transparency, Professor Weitzman. I have to say that, despite these challenges, Professor Weitzman is one of the most respected scholars in Morocco. He's probably the most famous also in Moroccan academic circles. He's quite a star. He's quite a star. And thank you so much for your work, because you were completely foundational and formative for me as a young scholar, as a Brandeis student. And I got in touch with Professor Weitzman, I think in 2012, and then in 2013, and his books are really, really in-depth analyses on the Amazigh movement and Amazigh consciousness and Amazigh Jewish consciousness. So I do recommend that people who are watching this discussion to check out his books if they are interested in the Amazigh Jewish component in Morocco. Thank you so much,
Thank you very much,
for joining us. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
And we're going to move to introduce, well, we've already introduced Face, but he is able to join us again. Ophir, could you launch Face's camera if you can? He should be with us. Amazing. Good to see you.
Hi, do you hear me now?
Do you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Beautiful. So,
Great,
Face,
great.
we already introduced you earlier, but just to remind people, you were the first Moroccan Muslim student to go study in Israel at the age of 18 in 1997, following the Oslo Accords. And as the first Moroccan student there, what were the biggest challenges that you faced?
Okay, you still hear me, right? Yeah. Challenges. Well, let me be more precise, because challenges as a foreign student in Israel enrolled in an undergraduate degree. Okay, but let me start with the positive aspect, if you don't mind, and then I will tackle the less positive. I believe that I faced the same challenges every student who goes to study to another country. I didn't have the financial resources to pay for my studies, so I had to work in order to pay for my studies. Unfortunately, it was not sufficient, so I took loans. But I was lucky enough to meet people who actually accepted to be my guarantors. So spent a lot of requests for scholarships and financial aid to several institutions, member of Knesset. Most of them were denied, but sometimes I was surprised and received a small financial aid. It didn't cover my tuition, but it did help for a month or two of daily expenses. So they didn't have to do that, but they did, and it was a very pleasant surprise. Now, for the less the less positive aspect, as a foreign student, that would be hands down dealing with the Ministry of Interior. That would be the nightmare of every foreign student or foreign worker in Israel. I read about the experience of foreign students in other countries. Oh, I think I got I lost audio here. You still hear me, right?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Great. Okay. So yeah, it's true that it can be worse in some other countries, hands down. But one thing I can tell you, coming to Israel as a non-Jewish student from Morocco is already a challenge by itself. But fighting the Ministry of Interior was even more challenging. Is the spiritual nuisance is a kind of way to go, the Ministry of Interior. So it took me 6 years instead of graduating 4, because I just had to deal all the time to find like some ways to fight the Ministry of Interior. But eventually I did graduate. So the funny thing is that I went to electronical and electrical engineering studies, but I graduated in Ministry of Interior Laws and Regulations. So that would be by far the most challenging part in Israel. That would be fighting the Ministry of Interior in order to stay in Israel.
Absolutely. And thank you for sharing that in such radical transparency. Now, I'd love to know, apart from the challenging experiences with the Ministry of Interior, what could have made your experience better, and what advice would you have for Moroccan students who might be interested in studying in Israel?
Interesting. It's a good question. So, you know, looking back, it's too easy to complain, okay, and making judgments. So I would say in general that it was my decision. well, I have a Moroccan mom, so it was definitely my mom's decision, but that's okay. She's not going to watch that, to come to Israel. So the hurdles I had to face, they originated from my lack of preparation. Now I was 18, it's just a kid, but coming to Israel requires some additional resources, preparation. So admit I was not well prepared. So beside the horrible experience with the Ministry of Interior, everything else would have been easier if I was prepared in advance. However, I have a couple of advices for a foreign student who is seeking to come to study in Israel for an undergraduate program, all right? An undergraduate degree. Israel is an amazing country, is an amazing adventure to study in Israel. Especially that everything here is around entrepreneurship, and it's regardless of what undergraduate degree you will choose. Just don't count on getting scholarships and or financial aids. Do that before you arrive. All right, that will be number one. Number two, if you can't afford to have the financial resources to cover the 3 or 4 euro tuition fee and living costs, make sure to have at least sufficient financial resources to cover the first year in Israel, tuition and living costs. Israel is amazing. Israelis are super cool and helpful, but we'll need a good year to get accustomed to the Israel culture and the harsh environment. A student visa, by the way, will allow you to work. Just bear in mind that a standard position, like student position based on shifts, won't be sufficient to cover tuition and costs. And if you have plans to stay in Israel after you finish your studies, work in your field as soon as you can, or at least get involved in your field as soon as possible. Don't wait for the end of your degree to find a job. Employers don't like fresh students with zero experience. It's the paradox I had to experience. How do you gain experience if no one gives you the opportunity to gain some? That's why you need a network of friends. In Israel, the advantage of students born in Israel is their military service that gives them the opportunity to build a network of army friends that they can reach out to later when they seek referral or job opportunities. The last one, do yourself a favor and immerse yourself very soon in Israeli culture and learn Hebrew. Tel Aviv is, of course, a cosmopolitan city. But there's a difference between a foreign student who speaks fluent English and a foreign student who speaks little Hebrew. Trust me, you won't believe how my early bad Hebrew opened me doors.
I can totally relate as someone who moved to Israel in my early 20s. That a lot of the things you said are also relevant for new immigrants to Israel, and we all have horror stories of dealing with Israeli bureaucracy, citizens and visitors alike. So welcome to the club, and I think those some very sage advice that's certainly still relevant today for anyone who comes and studies here. The universities are excellent, the academics are excellent, the social life is excellent, but I think you pointed out to all the pitfalls and the preparations that people definitely need to be aware of. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, and very cool. I did not know, Shama, that we had Moroccan exchange students as far back as that. So that's very, very cool to find out, and thank you for sharing that with us today.
You're welcome.
So who do we have next?
So next, I'm going to bring in Rachel Stern, who's a student working on an initiative called SEWA. Hi, Rachel. Good to have you with us. Rachel co-runs SEWA, the Gulf Israel Initiative, with Shane Weissman. She's in her 3rd year of government studies with a minor in counterterrorism, and also works at a sustainability doing consultancy work. Rachel, can you tell us a little bit about SEWA, the initiative, and introduce us to what are the activities that you've been working on? And obviously it started as a Gulf Israel initiative, but I know from Shane and yourself that you are trying to expand this into Morocco. So tell us a little bit about that.
And I would say we have to cap, I'm sorry, Rachel, you and the rest of the speakers at just a couple minutes each, because we have a few more to get to. Please go ahead.
All good. So just as as a little shell of our pretty in-depth initiative right now that is, yes, very flexible. We work out of Reichman University, newly called Reichman University. And by the way, I third everything that the previous speaker just said. I find that really, really astute observation to Israeli culture and just as an immigrant also. But basically with Saba, what we're working to do is bring students and student age, young professional individuals that are interested in fostering kind of a relation, more of a bottom up as opposed to the typical diplomatic Abraham Accords. Start with the diplomats, try to integrate some kind of program into the government system. We're looking to reach young professionals and students looking to foster individual relationships, whether it has to do with business or the environmental sphere or culture, tourism, everything, religion especially too. So we're just looking to have conversations and create that kind of link of discourse between two countries that previously, had relations, but not to the extent that we currently do. And yeah, we're working on expanding. We are working on an event for this year currently, creating just like a Abraham Awards Accords panel forum. But we're trying to expand that into a platform that's more inclusive of all of the nations, and just as a way to create connections. That's really the basis of it, to create an initiative to make joint collaboration.
That's awesome, and I think it's such a welcome initiative. And I have to say, Shane and I go back to the beginning of the Abraham Accords, and we are working on bringing Sawa together under the Sharaka umbrella, and we're very excited about it. And so, very cool to have you on the show, on this platform. And when Shaba invited you, she didn't know that we had been in contact with the Sawa, so it's really cool how all these circles come together, and you guys are doing fantastic work in bringing the much needed student voices together, first in Israel and the Gulf, and so exciting to hear that you're looking now to expand this to Morocco. Very cool.
Right. We currently actually are talking with students from, as of last year, from Bahrain and UAE, so we're definitely interested in also just uniting with as many people as we can reach, because it's just a topic.
Awesome.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Rachel, for joining us. I know you have to run to work, so thank you for making the time. And next, I'd like to bring in a Moroccan student. She is a legal consultant and a PhD candidate in Jewish law, an assistant law professor at the Faculty of Law of Mohammed V in Rabat, Agdal, and she is passionate about languages, including Hebrew, of course, and a member of the Center for Studies and Research on Hebrew Law in Morocco, as well as a member of the Mimouna Association. Miriam Ben Bouabid, can you see me? Can you hear me? Miriam, are you with us? I know she's in the room.
Do we have her?
If Miriam is unable to join, then maybe I'll have Afifa join us, another Moroccan student. Afifa, can we bring Afifa on board? Something just happened for a second. Ophir, could you help us bring Afifa on board? Something is trying to happen, but not quite. Let's try again.
So you'll have to pardon our technical difficulties.
Yes, this has been challenging. So Afifa is here. I mean, I can see her in the chat. Ophir, is there any way you can launch Afifa's camera? Either Afifa or Miriam.
The issue seems to be on her end.
Okay, so she's going to leave and rejoin. Let's see if Miriam is with us. Interesting. So this is taking a while. I think, meanwhile, I'll bring back Professor Weitzman just for a quick announcement from his university. Is there any way we can launch Professor Weitzman's camera?
Okay.
Amazing.
Okay.
So you're back.
Yeah, I'm wanted to say that I'm sorry that I didn't get to meet your Moroccan student when he was here 20 years ago, and it's a shame. And I certainly second all of his comments. I want to say that there has really been an expansion of international programs in Israel for Israeli universities in the graduate level, but also at the undergraduate level. Tel Aviv University has an excellent program which awards a 3-year program in the liberal arts, a interdisciplinary program in the humanities, in which one studies a whole variety of subjects from history to psychology, philosophy, entrepreneurship, literature, you name it. And it's a great program with students from more than 30 countries. We have had Moroccan citizens who have come from France or Italy in the past. I'm sure that there would Moroccan students would find a place in this program. I do want to say that it's absolutely essential for people who want to come to Israel to have their English in good shape, because all the studies are in English. It's a very successful program, and I urge people to pass the word. It's the only liberal arts degree program in Israel, and for foreign students. And I'm a big fan of the liberal arts, interdisciplinary degree in the humanities, and just want to let that be out there. There's also starting next year actually going to be a dual degree program in liberal arts and business, we certainly will appeal to people as well. Half courses in the business school and half the courses will be in the humanities. And so if you go to you can find all that information on the university website.
Thank you so much. And I also studied at Tel Aviv University, so I can back up that it's a fantastic institution, and certainly very, very possible to get a wonderful degree in English. But yes, English, if you don't know Hebrew, then English is certainly a very important language to have here. Thank you, Professor.
And we'll bring in Afifa if possible. Afifa, are you with us? Amazing. Good to see you.
Hi.
I'm a big fan of Afifa. She's a 23-year-old recent graduate from Al Akhawain University in Ifran, the oldest English-speaking university in Morocco. Her master's thesis was on educational policies vis-a-vis minorities. She focuses on Imaziren, or the Amazigh community in Morocco, and the Mizrahi Jews in Israel, as case studies to show that education is not always the panacea for minorities, but can actually work as an oppressive mechanism against them. In her analysis of the issue, she includes her own lived experience as an example. Currently, she's looking into ways to transform this theoretical work into practical one. Afifa, thank you so much for joining us. I just want to start with how you got into that specific master's thesis. What made you focus on the Mizrahi community in Israel, as well as the Amazigh community, and where do you see the most potential going forward for Moroccan students through this Moroccan-Israeli relationship? And if I could just ask you to keep it around 3 minutes, if possible, because we do have some other people joining us after. Thank you.
Hi. So first, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very excited to be among you. And thank you also for sharing your insights, scholarly work, but also your experiences. As Shama has mentioned, I defended 1 month ago my thesis, my MA thesis on educational policies in Israel and Morocco, had Mizrahis and Amazighs as case studies. So I am Amazigh myself, exactly from the Rif region, and I grew up in a household where only Amazigh and Rifi more precisely was spoken, so I had no Arabic at all. Only discovered Arabic through TV and at school. So I had to go to school where Arabic was the language of instruction and where my language, my mother tongue, had no space at all. So I grew up thinking about how this exclusion of my language impacted me and how it impacts also some other people, but how it also could have been so beneficial for me as a minority to have my language at school. So I come to EUI from law school, and after earning my degree in law school, I moved to AUI, and that's where I meet my supervisor, Dr. Clarice Herbourn, and she, for the first time ever, we have this class, very pioneering class on Moroccan Jews in the diaspora, and that's how I also come to discover some of the main issues of Mizrahis and Moroccan Jews, more particularly suffering and the mechanisms of oppression that have been directed against them in Israel throughout their presence. And also, I came to discover the shared present and especially past shared between Moroccans and Jewish Moroccans and Moroccans from other minorities such as Amazighs. So that's how my project sort of came out, and that's how I decided to write about that. It has been a very sort of tiring project in the sense that it required a lot of work from to meet my supervisor's standards, but it also was was a lot of great insight, because I also came to discover a lot about myself and about the shared history between these two minorities. So in that sense, I think that having collaboration between Israeli universities and Moroccan ones, especially with universities such as Al Akhawain, a liberal arts university, as Doctor has just pointed out, would be amazing actually, because that's how you can have people sharing their ideas and also promoting their culture and their and getting to know about their history that has been sort of marginalized. And it would be a way also to promote research in the field of either international relations, conflict resolution, inclusiveness. I can think of I can think only of amazing ways to promote collaborations between these two states. But so far it had been diplomatic and economic. Also, Haj has mentioned we really need an agreement between the two ministries in order to sort of push things ahead. Otherwise, that would require probably more time than it should. And thank you again for having me.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
And I would love to get Miriam on board, if we can get Miriam. Amazing. Good to see you, Miriam. So Miriam is actually a PhD candidate studying rabbinical law in Rabat. I already introduced her when we weren't able to get her on board, so I'm going to cut this short. But Miriam, thank you so much for joining us. And could you start by telling us why you focused on rabbinical and Jewish law? What attracted you to the field, and where do you see the most potential for PhD students and scholars going forward?
We can't hear you?
We can't hear you, so maybe check the settings, see if you're muted. Maybe try to remove Beautiful.
You can hear me?
Yes, we can
Okay.
hear you.
Okay. So thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy for being among you this night. To answer to the question, I chose to prepare my PhD about the rabbinic law in Morocco for many reasons. First of all, to my mind, the dispersion of the Jewish people and its existence among other nations has formed one of the most curious problems that the annals of the world would offer to human meditation. And nowhere else more than in Morocco, this community had the opportunity to gather to perpetuate itself, to preserve until nowadays its original traditions through centuries. Moroccan Jews had maintained their mores, their laws, their religion without any attempt from all the successive governments to assimilate them to the natives. On the contrary, the Islam had allowed them to have an autonomous legal organization and to apply the prescriptions of Jewish law for all the questions related to marriage, divorce, heritage, and to be judged by the rabbinical courts. So the history of Moroccan Jews is linked to the very history of Morocco, and the legal aspect is very interesting. It brings together public law. Public law, it means the organizations of Jewish communities, which is about their complete autonomy, the budget, the work, the worship, etc., and also the rules of private law. The rules of private law, which is inspired from the Bible. In Morocco, our Court of Cassation has a very rich and relevant jurisprudence and an interesting pool of judgments printed and jealously protected. What struck me was at first the legal literature, and particularly that of the responses, the takanot, the rabbinical court orders. It was a significant interest to me because we find in it what we call the socio-economic environment of the Jewish Moroccan law. So the methodical analysis of the works of Moroccan halakha highlights the daily concerns of the doctors of the law and the spiritual guides of communities who should answer to questions that extend to all aspects of all areas of public and private life, especially concerning the family unit, the status of persons, the social cultures, real law, and the relations between rabbinical courts and Muslim courts. Another factor had also determined my choice. It is the polarization of the Moroccan rabbinic culture in the halakha and the hegemony of jurisprudential law. The field of legislation is an essential place for the manifestation of the Jewish Moroccan faith. It is more than a research work. It is a scientific adventure, which, to my mind, deserves all its importance. And I think that the academic collaboration between Israel and Morocco and the collaboration between universities, it's is more than diplomatic instruments. It is a way of developing student skills, and it will allow students to share their educative experiences, and why not encourage the production of performance. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miriam, for joining us. And it's such a fascinating field. It's super interesting. And
Thank you so
we
much.
need a Zoom session just on rabbinical law in Morocco. I think it would be really cool. So
Yes.
thank you so much for joining us. And I want to introduce our next speaker, Asher Friedman. Or would you care to introduce Asher, your friend?
I'd be glad
Asher, good to see you.
I'd be glad to introduce Asher, an old friend of mine, and former and I guess current colleague, we can say in a way. If people are interested in the history and development of rabbinic law in Morocco, I'll point them to a very cool article I read in Segula magazine, which is a magazine of Jewish history, which last month had a feature all about Jewish Morocco, and an article about the development of rabbinic law in Morocco. And it turns out the guy who wrote it is now a colleague of mine at the Jewish People Policy Institute. Asher, welcome. We are thrilled to welcome Asher Friedman, the Israel director of the Abraham Accords Peace Institute, a nonpartisan, nonprofit U.S. organization dedicated to supporting the implementation and expansion of these historic peace agreements. The mission of the Institute is to strengthen the new bonds created through the Abraham Accords and ensure that the relationships achieve their fullest potential. Asher and I actually go back to where we helped co-found the UAE-Israel Business Council and work together on that project for a long time. And we actually go back even before that to where he was in government and I was researching and writing on issues related to the government ministry that he was advising and helping run. Asher, I'll also lastly mention that the Sharaka and the Abraham Accords Peace Institute signed an MOU of cooperation back in December, and we are already working hand in hand, consulting to each other, helping each other, and looking for future projects that we can work on to really push forward and help implement these peace agreements at all levels. Thanks for joining us. We'd be really glad to hear very briefly, and I think you are the final speaker tonight, what it is the Abraham Accords Peace Institute is working on in this space. What initiatives do you want to see happen? What initiatives are you trying to push forward? And what is the Abraham Accords Peace Institute doing these days?
So thank you so much for having me. And, it's Dan, it's been a pleasure working with you on building people-to-people relations over the last year and a half between the countries of the Abraham Accords. And I'm very excited now to expand the focus, my personal focus, on Morocco. So it is really a pleasure. Thank you for having me. The Abraham Accords Peace Institute, as you mentioned, is working on strengthening trade, economic investment, innovation, cultural, academic, and people-to-people projects, connections, bonds between the countries of the Abraham Accords, also tracking the progress and communicating the progress of the Abraham Accords out of the belief that by demonstrating the way it's been growing and the way it's been benefiting people on all levels and from all different backgrounds, it'll also bring more countries into the circle of peace. And one of the things that we've been focusing on, because we understand that academic connections, student connections, is one of the most powerful kinds of bonds that we can build between researchers, between people who have a deep appreciation of each other's heritage and culture, and between young leaders, we are working on the Abraham Accords Scholars Program, a student exchange program, with our initial focus being on graduate students, where students from the different Abraham Accords countries would study at each other's institutions, would also take advantage of the time they had in those institutions to become familiar with the people and the culture, and develop their networks in the countries, learn about their history, learn about their heritage, and then both form a cohort with their colleagues, and when they come back, being future ambassadors for the Abraham Accords and for this wonderful peace that has been developed. I can tell you, my focus, until recently, was on the UAE and in Bahrain, and now I am doing as much as I can to make up that gap and to become familiar with Morocco. I'll be coming there for the first time very soon, and I am extremely, extremely excited. We've spoken to the UAE education minister, the Bahrain education minister, the Israeli Council of Higher Education. We found quite a lot of excitement in all directions. Other players and actors, whether it's universities, philanthropists, some of Israel's leading universities that are very eager to take part. So we are working on advancing this project, and we would very much like to bring Morocco on board as well. So I invite anybody to reach out to us. We're very happy to talk to people. To begin developing the relationships and the familiarity that's necessary so that we can create this scholars exchange program that will connect all of the countries to the Abraham Accords. And I think it's been made clear on this call. And I'm just coming now from an event with the ambassadors from the different Abraham Accords countries and the ambassador of Morocco to Israel. It was very important for him to point out that there are 640 tzaddikim, righteous Jewish scholars who are buried in Morocco. Obviously, that's a sign of one of the signs of the very deep connections between Morocco and Jewish culture, Moroccan Jewish culture, and Islam in Morocco. So we very much would like to move this forward, and I invite all of you to reach out to us, reach out to the Institute, and we look forward to engaging.
Thanks so much, Asher.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Asher. And there you have it, audience. Asher is going to be in Morocco, so if you want to connect with him, you can find him on social media. And I just have to say, Dan, that this has been such an interesting discussion, and we couldn't even get to everybody we invited to be part of this. And I have to say that I've gotten so many messages, and so many people in my community wanted to be part of this, but unfortunately we can't fit everyone in one discussion. And we do hope that people will continue to connect with us on this topic. There is so much potential for academic partnerships between Morocco and Israel. And I know from my own community in Morocco that parents and students are ready to go to study in Israel. They know Israel as sort of an innovation country, as a startup country, and they want to benefit from the savoir-faire of Israeli institutes and universities. So without further ado, we are going to wrap this up because it is midnight here where I am. And if you've enjoyed this event or learned something new, please share it with your community. You can find this discussion or previous ones on Sharaka's YouTube channel and Facebook and Twitter. Also, don't forget to follow Sharaka and myself for all the updates. And don't hesitate to reach out if you have a specific question or want to speak or recommend someone for a future talk. What are we speaking about next week, Dan?
Next week, we will wrap up the series with the discussion on religion, society, interfaith dialogue. So that will be next Thursday as I get back from a Sharaka speaking delegation to Florida. I remind all of our listeners and viewers once again, Sharaka is a non-partisan, non-politically affiliated organization working to shape a new Middle East with strategic partners like Shama from across the region. If you like what you saw, I will also add the third non, and that's we are a nonprofit. And if you wish to help us expand our efforts, we invite you to contact us, info@sharakangio.com, or you can contact me directly, Dan@sharakangio.com. Of course, all of that is on our website or on our social media accounts. This has been fantastic. Indeed, we could easily have gone on for much longer. So much to unpack here. Shama, thank you once again for this fascinating installment of the series.
Thank you so much, Dan. And thank you to our audience, our viewers, and thank you to the participants and the panelists on this really interesting discussion. Huge thank you, everyone who made it possible.
Take care, everybody.